We know that COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in many challenges for employers, and that's probably a gross understatement. The most obvious ones are the layoffs and furloughs of millions of employees. We've had the transition of many employees to working remotely, and now it appears that many of those will remain working from home for the foreseeable future. And now employers are challenged by reopening their businesses and managing pandemic-related issues around returning to work. We're at the point where employers are beginning to try to contemplate a return to some kind of normal where both new challenges and some perennial ones, like creating cultures of diversity and inclusion, remain. So let's start this conversation with a specific challenge. We know that COVID has already raised issues for citizens and employees within the Asian community. And Rochelle, you've done the research for an upcoming article that delves into those issues specifically. So let's start there with you sharing a bit of what you found in working on your piece.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I know that we have read in the news that we have seen increased reports of discrimination and harassment against persons of Chinese descent and also other members of the Asian Americans in that community. And as the EEOC has pointed out, it's very likely that we'll see these issues increase as the workforce returns back into their places of business and things start to resume to the new normal. So I think it's incumbent upon employers to be aware of those issues and to make sure that we are addressing those head on, as we would in any other situation involving harassment and discrimination, meaning if we hear something, if you see something, say something, speak up and address those behaviors in real time. I think as I discussed in the article, I think where some more of the challenges will come in is where people express more frustrations about the COVID-19 illness and its impact on us and as Americans across the board, and may express frustrations regarding people in China, their actions, or make comments about the Chinese virus and those sort of things. And I think that employers also need to be sensitive to those issues as we return to work and make sure that we are also addressing those with the spirit of educating our employees about how those types of comments in a professional setting can make people feel very uncomfortable and make people feel not included in the workplace. So addressing those things, being sensitive to the frustration behind those type of commentary, but also setting expectations of what is acceptable as we continue our journey towards inclusion in the workplace. So I think those are some of the challenges. Steph.
Yeah, I myself, I think we all read a lot, have read a lot about harassment and mistreatment of people, not only in the Asian community, but in other minority communities. But I feel like that, for me at least, and maybe I'm just not reading the right articles, has died down a little bit. And I wasn't sure if that's because I'm missing something or if that's in fact true.
In terms of that actually happening? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've read a number of articles saying that there's already been reports of that, and maybe in the greater sense outside of the workplace so much. I think the EEOC I've not read any increased statistics yet, but I think it's something that we're going to see as people come back together and start working, and that expressions of frustration.
Yeah, and if I could just tag on to that, Rochelle. So yeah, Steph, I haven't seen EEOC statistics specifically. I know the EEOC has said that they're tracking cases where, and I don't know how they're doing this, but they're saying they're tracking comments and cases that pertain to COVID. So if there's some way that your comment or your harassment pertains to something pertaining to, like a COVID-related incident, or someone thinks makes a comment that could be construed as related to COVID, the EEOC has said that they are keeping track of that. But there are other organizations, specifically Asian advocacy organizations. I think the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, if I got that right, Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, APALA. They are actually, they have set up hotlines and things like that to take in sort of complaints about discrimination in the workplace and help people go through the EEOC process if that's what they choose to do. So that tracking is happening. Just if I can add to that, also, Rochelle, your point, I think you said employers kind of need to set expectations. I think the time is now for employers to be proactive about this, right? As people start coming back to the workplace. After September 11th, we saw, a big increase in discrimination complaints by people of Middle Eastern and Muslim descent. And I think that it's only logical in my mind that you're going to see that happening now as people come back to the workplace against people of Asian specifically East Asian descent in this case. And so one of the things that I think employers can do is right now start scheduling meetings, staff meetings, where they set expectations up front that, okay, we understand that we're living in a time of a pandemic. We have, people of Asian descent working here, and number one, being of Asian descent doesn't increase the likelihood that you've contracted COVID or that you're going to give it to somebody else. It's not appropriate to make an outbreak-related comment to your coworkers, right? Those kinds of comments won't be tolerated in this workplace, and maybe give examples of that. And also maybe anticipate that some customers might be uncomfortable dealing with Asian employees, at your workplace, and how is your company going to handle that, right? Are you going to, do you have any sort of policy in place? Obviously you don't want to cut the hours or cut the time of your Asian employees as a result of that, but that might be something to brainstorm for employers as well.
Those are great ideas, Sean. Jessica, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I absolutely agree with what Sean said, but also to make clear that, discrimination will not be tolerated by clients, customers, and third parties. I was also going to add that while we may be seeing increased instances of discrimination in the workplace or on Zoom calls, employers also need to be watchful or vigilant of what's happening on social media. I think just this morning I read an article about an employee expressing their frustrations inappropriately on social media, and there were some negative repercussions for that employee, but it's just something to also be aware of, that we need to make clear that what they say on social media could also have implications in the workplace.
Those are all good points. And I mentioned earlier that it's unclear when, if ever, many employees will return to a more conventional work from home situation or work from the office situation. And many of us will remain working from home for some months, if not permanently. And so, Jessica, just to kind of continue to expound on that, does the issues around diversity and inclusion and some of the ones that we've mentioned earlier, do those come into play in work from home situations that employers should be aware of at this particular time?
Yeah, absolutely. Ideally, diversity and inclusion would be a priority regardless if employees are in the physical workspace or working at home. But certainly working at home, I think, presents some new challenges and perhaps barriers to creating a more inclusive workplace. The one that stands out as we're all in this Zoom call, of course, is the increased use of Zoom technology and all of the potential issues, I should say, that go along with that. One that sort of stands out to me, maybe because of my real life, I'm a pretty introverted private person, is that when we're all using Zoom at home, it sort of gives a window that we normally would not have into each other's lives. We could see the backgrounds, see what each other's homes look like, and maybe give a window to things that people feel uncomfortable about or feel sensitive about, what their family situation may be, what their workspace looks like, and stuff like that. So it's just something to be more aware of and sensitive to.
Yeah, I had something along those lines. I think also in terms of when we don't have the benefit of the face-to-face contact, we also lose a lot of context, and we don't get really to see, I don't think we get a feel for people's tone of voice and body language as much over. So I think there can be a lot of area or room for miscommunication over Zoom we might not have in person, just because of not having access to those sort of things that we use in a daily basis on a conversation. So that, could lead to increased conflict at work also, I think.
Jeff, what did you have to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it seems to me employers, and to overgeneralize, but are responding to the pandemic in terms of D&I in sort of one of two extreme ways. One, saying, we can't even think about that right now. We just want to make people safe. It's just not a priority. Or the other side of the spectrum is, prioritizing it more than ever, because that's how we're going to be viable going forward. And I was just curious as to whether or not you all had been seeing that sort of dichotomy as well.
Sean, did you have something to add there?
Not on that point. I had a point to piggyback. Thanks for that, Stephanie. That was a good point. So I just wanted to follow up on Jessica's point regarding Zoom conferencing and how employers need to be aware. Another thing that I think Jessica has raised in another forum is that, look, Zoom also highlights the income, disparities that exist amongst employees, right, and the backgrounds that they have. And so I think, of course, income is not a protected category, but one thing that employers should be aware of is that employees of different socioeconomic backgrounds probably have different levels of internet connectivity. There might be a slower connection at home. There might be multiple people sharing the same connection, which can slow down their effectiveness in a sort of work setting. And I think that's something that employers need to be sensitive to in terms of trying to manage that in a way that's not, not insulting, not hurtful to employees who might be struggling to, put things together and appear online on a regular basis without their internet access being affected.
It's such a challenging time. And Sean, you've made a number of points in the conversation about, the challenges and some ideas for employers to think about as they sort of contemplate how to carve out work in the new normal. Are there particular things for managers that you can offer in terms of what managers can do? There are a lot of new challenges on managers' plates with all of this, work from home, the issues around COVID. Where would you suggest managers start, or what are some quick ideas that you might have that managers can grab onto as they're sort of into this new phase?
Yeah, well, I think I'll just say one thing because I feel like I've spoken too much already. So I'll say one thing and then open it up. One thing that I think would be useful as it pertains to diversity and inclusion is, which I've already mentioned, is trying to be proactive in scheduling these staff meetings where we talk openly about potential discrimination against Asian Americans, potential harassment, and what is okay, what is not okay, and then communicating that to all employees in your company. Just as people start coming back from work, you can have several meetings. Another idea is bystander intervention training, right? Teaching people how to be good bystanders if they see an act of discrimination or harassment against an Asian American employee. Those are two routes that employers can pursue, and I don't know if others have suggestions for other things. Yeah, Stephanie.
Yeah, and I think really critical moving forward is going to be taking what we've learned during this time from the harassment and racism and stereotyping that we talked about, that Rochelle mentions in her article, to the inequities that have been revealed that even those of us who care a lot about this maybe didn't even think of, the Zoom, how it might reflect your socioeconomic status or the fact that you don't have childcare or whatever. And we need to remember, when we go back to work, these things and not forget them as an integral part of inclusivity.
Yeah, and I think just kind of tie on what Stephanie had mentioned earlier about our employers pushing this to the back burner, or are they addressing these issues? I mean, I think some of the things that Sean mentioned, just in terms of having some open communication, is important. That's an easy thing that I know employers are focused on getting their workforce back to work and are probably somewhat distracted by that. But there's some easy things they can do in terms of having meetings and speaking candidly about these issues, and speaking candidly about taking the time to be more sensitive right now towards others. And because we all have a lot of challenges across the board as we come back to the workplace, and taking the time to be more sensitive and to think about their actions. And so I think there's some easy things we can do to incorporate some of these concepts.
Steph, you've mentioned a number of things that organizations that we need to be aware of and take the learning from this particular time into the workplace. Is there anything else? There's so many priorities for both HR and leadership in organizations. How can they begin, or should they begin, to try to do something formal or informal to get a handle, even broader than what we've talked about now, to begin to, if they haven't already started, or to continue the efforts that they've made around diversity and inclusion? What should they be doing actively?
Here's exactly what they should be doing, Lisa. I can't say that because just like the coronavirus, I don't think we know. And, it is what it is. And I think probably the best answer I have is to go back to basics, meaning leadership, modeling the right behavior, of acting with respect and treating others appropriately, and creating, as Sean mentioned and others have mentioned, opportunities to have conversations, an environment that's safe for raising concerns and inclusivity or lack thereof. So leadership needs to be a model, I think we need education. You know, it can only be put on the back burner for so long. You know, training efforts understandably have been put aside for the time being, but that's, you know, the pandemic isn't going anywhere. So that can't be an indefinite proposition. And we also need infrastructure. We need a system where if you have a concern, you can raise it comfortably and it's addressed appropriately.
Those are, Sean, did you have something to add?
No, that was it.
I was going to just, as we sort of draw the conversation to a close, going to give you guys an opportunity, each of you, to throw out one thing. You know, as Steph sort of painted the high-level picture of getting back to basics. Does anybody have something else to add as a takeaway before we end the conversation? Rochelle?
Well, I think just tying on what Steph had said about that is an easy thing might be to have a training, sort of a 30-minute Zoom training or an hour or something like that with managers, talking about some of the things that we have discussed today about in terms of inclusion and diversity and being proactive in addressing issues that come up in the workplace when employees are, you know, making inappropriate comments or treating people differently, and some of the things to be on the lookout for and how managers should address that. And so educating the managers on really what their role is in terms of shaping the workplace into what we want it to be during these unsettling times.
Steph, one more word. Jessica? Steph.
Jessica, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say my main takeaway would be to be flexible. These are ever evolving times, and be open to be more aware of the different issues that it presents as we go along, and be flexible to solutions.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I was going to say something similar, and that's really to be, open and also agile. I think that, you know, there's so many lessons from this experience, but one of them is that what we thought was right might not be. You know, a lot of employers, for example, the easy example is they didn't want to do remote work because they didn't think it was going to be productive. And lo and behold, here we are, and it is. So just being open-minded to these new lessons.
I think that's a good place for us to leave it. Thank you all so much for sharing your insight today, and stay well.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.